Hi everyone, Mark here, welcome to the channel. So this video is slightly different than any I've previously done, and I've put this together partly because I've had so many requests for it, but also to help people out who would like to know a little bit more about our family. This video might also be of help if you yourself are part of the Spurgeon family and you'd like to know a little bit more about our history. For those of you who don't know anything about Charles Haddon Spurgeon, I'm going to link to the Wikipedia page down in the description, and I'm also going to link to a couple of documentaries which cover his life. I'm going to start by showing you my exact relationship to Charles Haddon Spurgeon. So, in the way of names and dates, we have myself, Mark Kenneth Spurgeon, my dad, Kenneth William Spurgeon, my granddad, Gerald Robert Spurgeon. From Gerald Robert, we have Eric Robert, who is my great-granddad. His father was Robert Harold Spurgeon. Another generation back, and we get to my 3 times great-granddad, Reverend Robert Spurgeon, starting the tradition of the name Robert. From Reverend Robert, we have Stephen Church Spurgeon. Stephen's father was William Spurgeon, and William's parents were Clement Spurgeon and Anne Pinchbeck. These would be my 6 times great-grandparents. And this is what we would call our common ancestor. So my 6 times great-grandparents are also Charles Haddon Spurgeon's great-grandparents. So we have my branch of the family here. And starting with Charles Haddon Spurgeon, we go 1 generation back to his father, John Spurgeon. John's father was James. And obviously, James's father was Clement Spurgeon. So I also know this is a very common question relating to Charles's middle name, Haddon. This actually came from his paternal uncle, Haddon Rudkin Spurgeon, who in turn took this name from his own maternal grandfather, the father of Sarah Rudkin, who was Haddon Rudkin. And if anybody has any questions about the various lines of our family, just let me know in the comments and I'll be more than happy to help. So this is by no means a full list of locations which were relevant to Charles's life, but I did try and visit as many as I could over the course of the weekend. Roughly in the order which I visited them, we're starting off with the birthplace of Charles Haddon Spurgeon. This was at 73 High Street in Kelvedon. This is now a private house, so obviously I didn't disturb the residents. When Charles was born here on the 19th of June 1834, his mother, Eliza, was 19 years old, and his father, John Spurgeon, was 23. At this time, the family went through a pretty rough patch financially, and when Charles was 18 months old, he went to live with his grandfather, James Spurgeon, in Stanbourne. If you do want to visit Charles's birthplace for yourself, the postcode is on screen now. My next location was Colchester Town Centre. Charles's parents had moved here a few years later, and he then rejoined them at the age of 6 when they were a bit more financially stable. The original house in Hythe Hill has long been demolished, but there are a couple of streets close by which have taken his name. This is Spurgeon Street, leading to Haddon Park. And this is actually very close to the place where Charles was converted. On the 6th of January 1850, while on his way to a different church, Charles cut his journey short to shelter from a severe snowstorm. Walking into Artillery Street Chapel had a massive impact on his life. At this time, he was in many ways struggling with his faith, more specifically, how to deal with sin. The preacher singled Charles out while quoting Isaiah 45:22 as part of his sermon. There is some disagreement over this exact date, as well as some confusion about who exactly this preacher was. Some researchers have suggested that Charles remembered the date incorrectly, and it was actually the following week, Sunday the 13th of January 1850. The intended preacher had apparently not been able to make it on that evening due to the bad weather, so it was a local man who had taken his place. When I arrived at Artillery Street Chapel, I was only expecting to take a video, maybe a few photos from the outside. I actually got there just in time for the evening service on the Sunday. Everyone here was really welcoming, and they were more than happy for me to film inside the building. I've briefly paused because it was around this spot that I was standing just here to film the video that Charles took a seat on that day back in January 1850. Looking around the interior, this has changed significantly. As you can see from the picture, there was also originally an area upstairs with a balcony overlooking this lower level. This is now closed to the public and boarded over to form a lower ceiling. So if you want to visit here yourself, the postcode is on screen now. I was hoping to then visit the River Lark, where Charles was baptised on May the 3rd, 1850. In the end, this turned out to be too far away from the other locations I had planned to visit. Access would have also been an issue. The only way to get to this exact spot is either across the river or across private land. Here is the exact location on the map and also the postcode of the closest street if you'd like to arrange a visit here for yourself. The other location I would like to have visited is the small cottage in Teversham where Charles preached his very first sermon. Let me know in the comments if these places are somewhere that you'd like me to visit, and I'll do my best to make it happen. Again, I'll put both the postcodes and the location on screen now. The next location that I visited only briefly was the site of the New Park Street Chapel, just south of the River Thames. So, after gaining a reputation for his unique style of preaching, Charles received a letter on Sunday the 27th of November 1853, inviting him to preach here with the intention of becoming their new pastor. At the time, this church had been around for over 200 years, but its location became detrimental and it was apparently prone to flooding. Starting on Sunday, the 18th of December 1853, from his first service, the congregation grew substantially over time. It went from 200 to something like 2,000. It actually got to the point where the building could no longer hold the crowds, and over the space of a few years, they moved to and from Exeter Hall while renovation works were carried out. It was also during this time that Charles met his future wife, Susanna Thompson. It was eventually decided that a much larger building would be needed, and so, while the funds were generated, they moved to what was then the largest indoor venue in London, the Royal Surrey Gardens Music Hall. This building was much bigger than the New Park Street Chapel and Exeter Hall. It could seat something like 12,000 people. On the 19th of October 1856, Charles preached his first sermon at the music hall to around 10,000 people. Thousands more people waited outside who were unable to get in. Unfortunately, during the service, somebody at the back of the hall shouted fire and claimed that the balconies had collapsed. This caused mass panic in the crowd, with everybody struggling to escape. It turned out there was no fire, but during the chaos, 7 people were killed and 28 people were seriously injured. This is something which had a lasting impact on Charles's mental health and his life in general. Several years later, in 1861, the music hall was destroyed, this time by a real fire. The entire location finally closed to the public a year later. In more recent times, most of the estate has been repurposed, and the lake has disappeared. In the 1980s, the Royal Surrey Gardens was reopened as Passley Park, which was my next location. This is obviously a much smaller area, which only occupies part of the original site. You can see on the map the original size of the site. You will also find a couple of notice boards in this park which detail its history. I'll briefly show them on screen in a moment, so you can pause and read through them if you want to. I'll also put the postcode of this location on screen now. So, as mentioned before, the Royal Surrey Gardens Music Hall was only ever intended to be a temporary location, while the funds were generated for somewhere more permanent. That permanent location was the Metropolitan Tabernacle in Elephant and Castle. Charles had considerable influence in the building and design of the tabernacle, as well as contributing £5,000 of his own money towards its construction. At today's prices, this would be around £350,000, possibly a bit more. As you can see from this drawing, the original plan was to have 4 towers, one at each corner. But Charles stated that at the cost of £4,000, it could not be justified. When I arrived at the Metropolitan Tabernacle, they were just closing. However, I was invited back the following day to do some filming. As you can see from the exterior, the tabernacle still has the name Spurgeon's. Looking at the interior, you can see that the sanctuary is massive, but it was originally much bigger. Due to significant damage, the interior of the tabernacle has been renovated twice. The first time was due to a fire in 1898. The second was due to bomb damage during the Second World War. This whole back wall is a more recent addition, and the room actually stretched several metres further back and also occupied the space where the bookshop now stands. Here is a picture of the main sanctuary as it would have looked when Charles Spurgeon preached here. Charles actually wrote quite a lot of books during his lifetime. At one point, I think it averaged something like 4 books every year, which is amazing. It was the royalties from his books that he used to start and fully finance the Pastors' College. So this was my next location in Upper Norwood, and Spurgeon's College has been here on this site since 1923. With the permission of the college officials, I did some filming both inside and outside the buildings. This isn't actually too far from where Charles came to live in 1880. Both Charles and Susanna's health had been majorly affected by the pollution in London city centre, where they lived for many years. So this change of location was obviously beneficial. Later on in his life, Charles had suffered with both gout and Bright's disease, which became progressively worse. He used to frequently visit Menton in the south of France, and this is where he passed away on the 31st of January 1892. Charles's death was headline news in all the national papers. After returning to London, his body lay in state at the Metropolitan Tabernacle. His funeral was also very close to what you might call a state occasion. Along the route from the Metropolitan Tabernacle to West Norwood Cemetery, shops and pubs had closed. It was estimated that in total, around 100,000 people had gathered or visited to pay their respects. Charles's grave at West Norwood Cemetery was my final location for this trip. Now, if you're planning to visit Charles Spurgeon's grave for yourself, it can be a little bit difficult to find. So I'll put a map on screen now, with both the entrance to the cemetery and Charles's grave both marked. When Susanna passed away, she was also laid to rest in the tomb, with Charles on the left and Susanna on the right. Their son Thomas is also buried in an unmarked grave, just to the right of Charles's tomb. I'll leave you now with this short video that I've taken of the tomb and the inscriptions. I'll also show you some of the other photos, which up to now I haven't included in the video. So feel free to pause at any time to have a good read through. Also let me know down in the comments if you would like to see another video which focuses more on my line of the Spurgeon family tree, and also our family in general going back over the years. I hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you all soon.